Okay, hello there, everyone. We'll get going here. All right, so did everyone get the project turned in today? All right, or earlier? Nice, okay. So I should get most of those graded tomorrow. So just kind of keep a lookout for grades to come in. Pay attention to my comments too. I like to try and comment on everyone's, especially if there's something specific to work on. If it all looks great, then usually I just say looks good. But if there's something specific to work on, I'm going to try and mention that. One of the most often things I mention is the use of the pen tool. We're going to be using the pen tool a lot, especially in the next couple weeks and for the next project. So I'll show you guys a quick little thing of what I want you to look for specifically with the pen tool and kind of how to practice that. But we're going to kind of be focusing on that to make sure you guys have a really good understanding of how to use that for the next project. So I'm always kind of glad to, get this first project out of the way. I mentioned it's not the most creative, but it's just like making sure you guys understand the basics of Illustrator. So the next project should hopefully be some more fun, and we'll get into, making some cool finished art in Illustrator, using what we've learned, in the drawing challenges and during the lectures, and then putting that to use with Adobe Illustrator. So we'll be getting more creative, also more challenging. So, also kind of use that first project as, just a good test to see where you're at. If, just using the pen tool is tricky. If, designing the different shapes and finding different line qualities was tricky, just kind of know that those are things that you're going to have to use later on. So take that time to practice those things as you work. So yeah, I should have those graded, most of them tomorrow or the next day, hopefully. They usually don't take me too long to grade. So the next project 2, we're going to start looking ahead at project 2. I know you guys just finished project 1, but basically the second we finish one project, we start looking ahead at the next one. So project 2 is due on the 7th. So your homework for this after class today and before the next class is to go and look at that project, read through it, see if you have any questions. On Thursday, I'll kind of give you a general overview of that project and what to expect and what I'm looking for on all that stuff. So come to that next class with any questions that, really stand out to you after you read through that project. And as far as the pen tool, I will be suggesting, just a sec, let me pull up the videos here. Some practice worksheets basically I have for you guys to practice with the pen tool, and video tutorials to go along with that. So hopefully those video tutorials were useful for you guys getting everything saved and all that stuff. So yeah, this one, episode 11, I'll just put it down here in the chat. Really shows you how to use the pen tool worksheets, which are this file right here under section 2, pentool.zip. So this is a good, there's like 4 or 5 different files in here that you can work through with the videos. And you basically should be able to do these different worksheets really well in order to complete the next project really well. So they start out really simple and get more complicated, but it's basically tracing over different shapes with the pen tool. That's kind of a lot of what the next project's going to do. Rather than tracing over shapes, you're going to be tracing over your rough sketches with that. So that is how we will proceed from there. I'll send a message just to remind you about that and where to find that. But just know that's what will be going along with the videos. And when you get your grades back from project 1, just always let me know if there's any questions or anything like that on your grades. I'm happy to offer explanation. If your grade really isn't what you want, feel free to resubmit. Just kind of let me know when you do resubmit so I make sure to see it. Because I want you guys to like maximize your points on this first project because it's kind of the most simple. So I've glanced at a few of them so far that I've got turned in earlier and they all look pretty good. But yeah, if you're missing big chunks of points on that, you can resubmit it if need be based on any suggestions or comments that I make. Any questions on that before we move on to our general art lecture today? All right, so today we will be talking about the rule of third and symmetrical compositions. Has anyone ever heard of the rule of thirds before in terms of composition or artwork or photography?
I've seen it like in movies, but like when does one camp thing like the movie camp, and they said once you learn about the rule of thirds, you can't unsee it from movies.
Exactly. Yeah, it's used a lot in film. So it's basically a very simple, very useful kind of formula or a guide for how to design a composition. And everyone uses it, all sorts of, photographers, film, illustrators. It's used all over the place. And it's really just like kind of a guide or a cheat sheet for how to design a good, pleasing composition. And once you kind of know that rule, you can kind of work within that rule and be creative within that rule. But it does a lot for you to help you get that good and pleasing, natural looking composition. So we'll look at some examples today and I'll kind of show you guys how to use it. And kind of the opposite of that rule, maybe not opposite, but a different version of composition is a symmetrical composition, which you guys may have heard of as well, and probably have done as well, but they can go hand in hand. There's one isn't better than the other necessarily, but there's times to use one and times to use the other, and it's kind of good to experiment with both. So just let's look at both of these. So they are both related to the focal point. So it's basically when you're starting a composition and you're like, where do I put the focal point? So let's make two simple compositions. All right. So let's say our focal point is just a face here. Let's start with very simple. So if I'm going to put my person in either one of these, where do I put that focal point? Where do I put that person? Where do I put their face? So there's just kind of two starting points. So one is symmetrical. So that one is oftentimes kind of the default. People will kind of do that if they don't know anything about composition. So if you hand a little kid a camera and say, take a picture of this person, they will just kind of put that person right in the middle. So that kind of creates that symmetrical look there, meaning it's evenly divisible right down the middle and each sides are basically balanced. So that just means something's in the middle. Then oftentimes, not always, but things on either side are similar and kind of weighted the same. So you have kind of stuff on both sides. So even if you have, something on one side there, like a tree, you might have like a lamppost over here, even though they're not the exact same object, it still kind of weights the two sides of that composition the same. The rule of thirds is this little grid that is you can place on top of your composition that basically looks like this. So have you guys seen this grid on your iPhone cameras, cell phone cameras? Oftentimes there's that grid on there. Not always, sometimes the setting gets turned off. But it's just saying, what was that?
I was just gonna say, I use mine all the time as a photographer.
Nice. Oh, what sort of photography do you do, Hayden?
I really like nature photography. I just had the opportunity to go to Africa, and that's where I practiced most of everything I know about this. So I love going over this for drawing because there's a lot of parallels, and so it's super cool.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. Photographing in Africa, that sounds amazing. You get any wildlife pictures?
Yeah. Wildlife photos are the best. I got lots of rhinos, elephants, all the cool stuff that you'd expect to see. Pretty professional too. I'm getting pretty good at it. I'll have to share my link sometime.
Yeah, definitely. You should show it. I'd love to see it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as Hayden noted, he uses a lot in photography. So it's that rule that any sort of visual storytelling or visual medium is going to use this rule. So that's why they plop this on the screen when you open up your camera app on your phone. Basically, it can make anyone into a good photographer, and it kind of tells you where to place that focal point. So kind of be interesting, Hayden, for you to see kind of the similarities and differences of using this for photography versus for art and illustration. So I use this pretty much as like my default way is when I come up with a composition of, how to design a composition that I'm going to use for any given project, basically. So this little grid here is basically telling you where to put the focal point. So wherever these lines intersect is gonna be pretty much a good place to put that focal point. So you can put the head of this person here, here, or here. So let's just put it down, let's put it on this one. So it kind of just creates a different composition than the symmetrical one. So that default is to put something smack dab in the middle. Sometimes sometimes that's cool. So we'll look at some examples of when that is a good thing to use. But when you want to do something different than that direct one, it creates a little different feel to it. So having something off center, it creates usually more interesting shapes with, any sort of background elements. So I still have those bushes there. So those bushes aren't as even. I can still place this, the lamppost in here. There may not be room for that tree over there, but it kind of creates a nice balance in there without having everything being plopped right in the middle. So it's a really nice way, and really you can design any sort of composition using this rule. So as you're doing those thumbnails for a given project, or for that barn and silo option that we were talking about before, or that was that you guys were hopefully completing. This are good options to play with both of these as you're thinking of something for a project, working on thumbnails, to play with both of these options. So let's just look and create a different version. So all right. So let's do our focal point. So remember, always know your focal point. So let's do a sailboat here. I like drawing boats. I like drawing landscapes. So we'll do a boat there. What we're going to do is we're going to design two compositions here that use all the same elements, but one is designed symmetrically and one is designed with the rule of thirds. So as you're working, lots of times I will very lightly sketch in those guidelines. So especially as you're starting out, as you're working on your thumbnails. I would suggest sketching in those guidelines, whether it be symmetrical or for the rule of thirds. So let's start with that focal point. Let's just put that focal point right here in the middle. Okay. Can also put this symmetrical can also deal with vertical symmetry. So you can put the line this way as well. So I'm just going to put the horizon line, the edge of where the water meets the land, right there as well. We'll put some hills or mountains there in the background. Put the sun right here in the middle. We'll put some rock and land in the foreground and kind of design that symmetrically as well. So they're going to have very different feelings to them. It's going to have a different feel to it if you design a symmetrical composition or a rule of thirds composition. So we'll talk about some of those specific differences here in a sec, but we'll just kind of look at the visual of it here to start. All right, let's do a rule of thirds one now. So these rule of thirds, I'm trying to put these approximately on the 1/3. I'm not going to get a ruler out and measure your compositions and, you know, make sure it's perfectly evenly divided. As long as it's close and you can eyeball it, you know, if this looks off down there, then you can see, oh, that looks off, like that's way too low. All right, so we can take this guy. So as I move this, I can put this guy here, 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 or there. So any one of those would work. Let's try it up there. I'm actually gonna, okay. So now this creates some more interesting space here around the focal point. I can make it a little bigger or a little smaller. I'm gonna leave it about this size for now, but for now this space all is gonna work a little bit differently. So now as I put in this horizon line right here, I'm gonna put that on 1/3 as well. So it's really just a nice way to divide up that space. So I can decide, what do I want to dominate this composition? Right now I have about 1/3 of sky and 2/3 of water. So right now this composition is visually going to be more dominated by the water. You can still put in some of those foreground rocks. These rocks can get maybe a little bigger here because there's this more space over here. Because this focal point is moved off to the side, that allows more space there to put some of those rocks in the foreground. Still put the mountains back in here, just like in the other one. When I put the sun in here, I could put it here, but another nice place to put it is, again, on this 1/3. So I'm like, where do I put the sun? Oh, I'll put it on that 1/3. And then I can, you know, design some wave shapes in here. You know, then I can design those leading lines that we've talked about. Different things like that. So now, again, one isn't better than the other, but this one feels a little bit more staged. And this one here is going to feel more natural. Like it kind of just fell into that composition. So again, I have a drawing challenge for you guys this week, and it's basically gonna be doing something similar to this, where you are taking the same elements, but designing two different compositions, one that's symmetrical and one that's using the rule of thirds there. So again, one's not better than the other, and it's good to experiment with both of those. So for symmetrical, it kind of has some inherent feelings to it. So again, feels more staged. It may have a religious or political feel. Think about our religious buildings, political architecture. Those sorts of buildings are oftentimes designed symmetrically. So if you want to create that feeling in your artwork, you can use that sort of composition. It can also give a strong or powerful feeling as well. And rule of thirds, again, it'll just feel more natural, kind of pleasing to the eye. And we'll just have that kind of nice feeling to it. And again, learning kind of these rules, and then you can learn to be creative within those rules. How are you personally going to use the rule of thirds for your specific composition? How will you use a symmetrical composition? What are you trying to say with that symmetrical composition? All those different things, kind of go forward from there. Let's just do another symmetrical one. Let's do that. Just think about how religious buildings are oftentimes designed. They're oftentimes designed symmetrically. So when we were talking about those leading lines with perspective lines, that can be used oftentimes nicely for symmetrical compositions. So if you want to evoke those feelings, if you want to get across that sort of idea, you can think about those different sorts of things about what sort of composition you want to use. Then a big one with the rule of thirds is that what it really helps you with. Actually, let me just make a new page for this. Avoid the edges and the margins of your composition. So this is something I see a lot in people's work. And this is something you really want to avoid. So wherever something important is going to go, the rule of thirds helps you avoid it. So you don't want to put anything important around those edges, okay? So let's just do a composition. Let's do a little rule of thirds here. Draw on those guidelines. So let's just say our focal point is a little house there. A little house example. So I don't want to put the house right there anywhere along these edges. So this is something I'm looking for in your thumbnails, in your final art, that I do not want to see. I don't want to see anything around that edge. So you can put it down here on this one. You can put that shape down there. This goes for, representational or abstract work as well. Even if your composition's abstract, you can be using these same rules. So we have that now on that, clearly on that third, it creates a nice bit of space up here for us to play around with. We can put some background elements, other shapes. So again, we want to avoid the edges here. So nothing important along there. So you can put unimportant stuff there. So this composition here is about this house. The house is the focal point. That's what I want people to look at. So I can put the sun up here along the edge. I can put some clouds on the edge. We can put some plants down here in the corner. Avoid edges, margins, and corner. So all that stuff is fine to put along the edge there, as long as it's nothing important to your composition. And then it creates nice space. You know, I can create, so here I've created leading lines too. So a lot of that stuff too, by putting on that third, it allows me space to create those leading lines that we've been talking about. So now I got some leading lines coming into this composition as well. And so oftentimes it's kind of easier to add those leading lines when you're working with the rule of thirds there. So make sure you guys note this, write this down, avoid the edges of those compositions. So that'll be something that I'm definitely looking for on your thumbnails and final projects. Okay, any questions on how to use rule of thirds or symmetrical compositions?
What about like oversized things on the page or in the composition? Like in the barn thumbnails, I believe on one of them, the barn runs off the page.
Like if you just have a really big focal point there?
Yes. Is it okay to go off the edges then?
Yeah, let's sketch a little example, see if we're on the same page of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, like I think I have one too in mind where I don't even have the whole barn or silo in the picture. It's focusing in between the two of them to something in the background.
Oh. So something like this. So now, I mean, if this is your composition, you know, if you said it's focusing something here on the background, maybe you have, you know, a person here. So now these are no longer the focal point. These become kind of framing shapes here in your composition, and the person there is the focal point. So that's fine there because the person is the focal point. If you do have those things that are really big, sometimes it is good to have a really big focal point. Let's just see. I find lots of times when I do a really big focal point, I will kind of use that symmetrical composition. So this one may get really close to that edge there. Maybe it goes outside of the edge. So now this here, this barn is so big, it is right close to that edge here. It's right close to the edge there. And that's fine. So sometimes, you know, when you do make something really big, these rules will shift or change as you're working. But this kind of will give that, you know, a really strong, you know, composition. This is basically a symmetrical composition here. And later on project 3, we'll start talking about, you know, how to design compositions to evoke a certain type of mood or feeling in the artwork, and making a really big focal point and using that symmetrical composition is going to make give you a kind of a strong or powerful feeling with it, with your composition. Are those kind of the examples you guys were thinking about there?
Yeah, basically.
So yeah, as with all these rules, we're not in science class. There's going to be times where you know, these rules are often kind of generalizations. There's time to break the rules. There's times the rules don't always necessarily apply and things like that. So there will be times when you can kind of change stuff up. But, you know, as I look at this one more, you know, now the barn and silo isn't quite, you know, the focal point as much. I'm seeing more kind of the shape of the door almost becomes the focal point. And how I, you know, start to add values, which we'll talk about next class, will change the feeling of that there. But those are good questions. So definitely, you know, next time you take out your camera app on your phone, check to see if you have that setting on to have see if you have those rule of third guides there on your phone, because it's kind of good just to play around with that in photography as well, when you don't have to worry about drawing. You'll start to understand it more when we do the drawing challenge this week, where you kind of experiment and make 2 versions. And then when you start to think about your thumbnails for project 2, I want to see in your thumbnails that you're trying some symmetrical compositions, some rule of third compositions, some with a really big focal point, some with a really small focal point, and things like that, just to see how it affects your composition sort of emotional response you get to it, and what ultimately creates the most pleasing composition for your given piece of artwork. Any other questions on this? Okay, cool. Let's pull up some examples here really quick. Okay. So I found a cool blog a while ago that used The Incredibles to illustrate a bunch of different art concepts. Have you guys seen The Incredibles before? Classic Pixar movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. So I got a bunch of screen grabs here from the movie where it's showing that they're using the rule of thirds there. So this is about as simple as you can get with a composition. One focal point, no background elements, and just putting that face of the character. If you know, usually if it's a person will be the focal point. If it's more of a close-up of the person, their face will become the focal point. So putting that face on the third there. So they could have put that face on any of those thirds. That one made the most sense because it would probably look kind of weird to, cut off the head or cut off the shoulders as they were looking at this. It gives a nice space here for the eyesight line to kind of move our vision, through that space here. Creates a nice balance where this is a big empty space and here is your focal point. But again, it could have gone on either one of these thirds, but they chose that top one. Putting it on the top, you're kind of looking up at the character. It's going to make the character feel a little more strong since that goes with the type of character it is there. So here it just gets slightly more complicated. They just add in another character, but they're still using that rule of third. We'll just open this up and notice. So this was when you do have more than one focal point, which you guys may by the end of the quarter, probably not on this next project. Having a nice diagonal relationship between those two focal points is a nice way to kind of move the eye throughout the entire composition. So again, very simple, no background elements here, but just a nice way to kind of use those two different thirds with two different focal points there. All right, so what do you think is the primary focal point here, the main focal point we're supposed to look at first in this one?
Violet.
Yeah, right there. So looking right there at the character, or actually both the characters, her especially since she's right on the third, their sight line creates that leading line. Brings us up to that secondary focal point there to the bird that's also on a third. So nice spacing there. See all these plants kind of create a little frame around the characters. We'll talk about that later. Creating a frame in your artwork is a nice way to make the focal point stand out as well. So this is a very busy scene overall. There's a lot of bushes and leaves and stuff going on. So especially when you have a complicated composition, it is even better to use that rule of thirds. So if we kind of crop this in right here, put those characters along the edge, it starts to feel more awkward there. So just having that extra space with those edges, keeping the focal point away from the edge, putting them on the third, allows for some leading lines, allows for that secondary focal point. And all this stuff is less important, like the bushes and trees, leaves, that's not as important, so that can be along the edge. This is another example. And it makes a nice space so you can see background stuff, so you can see where the characters are. Another one. This was drawn in by the person who made the website. So using leading lines too, the street lines here all lead to the character as well. So we talked about division of space as well. Where is that good division of space? So this becomes a nice division of space here. So oops. So we got about 1/3 of sky and 2/3 of ground. So the artist made a decision here. It's the illustrator Howard Pyle. They made a decision. What do I want to dominate this composition? Do I want the sky to dominate, or do I want the ground to dominate? Because oftentimes if it's done, right in the middle, it can feel kind of awkward. You're not sure what's more important. So this artist made the decision they want the ground to be more important. Well, why is the ground more important? Because that's where the character is. The character isn't up there in the sky. So just having that focal point, the face of the character be right there around the third. This other shape down here becomes, you know, a leading line. The gun there is a leading line. And it just creates a really pleasing composition overall. So even if when we take away the grid, it works really well. Creates that nice pleasing composition. And again, this one's really simple. You know, one character, the sky, the ground, and a couple extra shapes in there. But it works really well for this composition. So again, it's not always going to be exactly on those dots. So this one's still just on this third here, which is a good place to put it as well. But this RSU uses it to divide it up, kind of the opposite of the other one. So this one's 2/3 sky and 1/3 land. So you'll see it a lot in dividing sky from land. Hayden, do you use the rule of thirds when trying to find where to put the horizon line or dividing sky and ground in photography?
Oh, every time. It's my biggest tool.
So yeah, you'll notice that, you know, if you guys start taking pictures and see that grid on your phone, your camera app on your phone, to just use that. I know I told my dad, he takes all these pictures with his phone and stuff, and I was like, Dad, you know what this grid is for on your phone? Because he was always putting that horizon line right there in the middle. I was like, just put it on one of these lines. That's what they're there for. And then all of a sudden his pictures got way better. You know, just that simple little thing right there. Knowing that little trick is a good way to make your compositions much better. But sometimes you want symmetrical feel. So here is a Captain America cover. So this is not, you know, an actual moment from the story, you know, of Captain America. This is like a staged cool pose with basically his background becomes just kind of abstract shapes. And I know it's the pattern from the American flag, but these are just, you know, lines and pattern up here. So this isn't like a specific moment from the story. It's a staged moment. It's divisible right down the middle. We have these architectural elements to give us kind of that government feel. And it works for this character and to, you know, give an insight into what this story is going to be about. You know, the overall feel of this character, the feel of the story, the symmetrical pose does work really well. So again, trying both of those types of compositions in your thumbnails will allow you to see which one works better and which one is going to be the best choice for a given piece of artwork. So I mentioned those political buildings, very, very, very symmetrical. Capitol building, visible right down the middle. So it has a very ordered feel to it. You know, people like symmetrical things. You know, it's kind of like how we were talking, people like pattern. It's very ordered, very predictable. So sometimes that symmetrical can be good, and it's fairly easy to execute it as well. Just putting something in the middle and putting equal things on either side. So again, it's good to try both as you're working through compositions. And then the religious building. Yes. Here's some sort of church as well. So again, design this way can evoke that feeling if you choose to use that that sort of composition. right. Okay, so that is pretty much going to be it for today. Any other questions on how to use the rule of thirds or symmetrical compositions? All right, so I'll send a message around to you guys. I'm going to make a new drawing challenge, so that is involved in you guys designing 2 different compositions, one that's symmetrical, one that use the rule of thirds. Just so you guys can practice that yourself and kind of really see how to use those 2 different types. I'm going to go ahead and get your projects graded, hopefully by tomorrow. So just look out for those grades to come in. Let me know if you have any questions after you do that. And then next class, I'll kind of give an overview of project 2. So make sure you guys look at the description of project 2 and come with any questions that kind of jump out at you as you're looking at that. But other than that, that will be it for today. And I'll see you guys on Thursday.